37, we're going to reconvene as the Mendocino Council of Governments, and the first thing on this part of our agenda is public comments. Public expression is welcome, and any member of the public can comment for up to 3 minutes, in particular for things that are not on today's agenda. But we also have public comment on things that are on today's agenda. So still coming up on today's agenda will be a recap of the discussion of the Point Arena Walla area tour, which we're still to do the Walla tour next, as well as just transportation plans and projects in general for MPOC. But you can speak now or on that agenda item. So does someone want to address the board?
My name is Kathleen Chasey. I'm a resident of Walla, and I'm also on the board of the Redwood Coast Land Conservancy. And that's a local land conservancy that's little, that was put together originally way before my time to do the Walla Bluff Trail. We are in the process of working to buy 112 acres right here at the mouth of the Walla River. It's called the Mill Bend. So where the river just takes a turn, goes under the Caltrans Bridge, so that we can actually extend the California Coastal Trail from the town of Walla into Sonoma County. And I'm here to start hopefully a process to get a pedestrian walkway, maybe a pedestrian / bicycle walkway attached to the Caltrans Bridge that goes across the river. I'm not quite sure what my next step is, but I thought maybe this was an interesting first step.
The first step is introducing an idea, and so Mendocino Council of Government. So you may know that this is a joint powers authority of the county and the cities of Mendocino County, and so our board is made up of council members and county supervisors and one member of the public, we have meetings basically once a month. There is a permanent staff that do planning and administration. We're funded. A 1/4-cent sales tax exists in California that funds transit, and a portion of that, before it goes to transit, goes to this planning process. Caltrans will also fund plans. Anyway, so there's constantly plans going on throughout Mendocino County, which you're in here partly some about it later. And we are meeting here in Walla and Point Arena today because basically twice a year we meet off-site. We don't meet in Ukiah twice a year, and today we're meeting here on the South Coast. And so introducing an idea often leads to it getting into a plan, and then that is usually what's required for it to be eligible for public expenditure at some point in the future.
So my next step is?
I would follow up and talk to MPOC staff, and Nephili Barrett, she's the executive director of this group, Mendocino Council of Governments, and you can talk about how it might work in one of the existing plans or a future plan.
Okay.
Yeah, so definitely contact our office, and it's something that if you've got contact information, follow up
I do
as well. All right, and then we've actually got some not immediate, but starting about a year from now, we'll be updating our active transportation plan and regional transportation plan, and so those are our major planning documents that guide what we do. They are updated now every 4 years, and so those planning processes would be opportunities to identify something like that. But then, like Dan mentioned, there are also other planning processes that are more specific to a project that we do, or sometimes Caltrans does, that can lead to a project. So
I'll give you my card.
perfect.
Take yours.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank
What
you.
Kathleen is talking about makes total sense because it's directly adjacent to the southern end of the Walla Streetscape Enhancement Project. And the Walla Town Plan calls for the Walla Bluff Trail to be continued down to the county line and to the bridge. So it would be a wonderful pedestrian project for down the road.
And for the purpose of our minutes, and you may give your name, you can just restate each of your names for the minutes.
Oh, sorry. Robert Youngling, GMAX Chairman.
I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong person. I'm sorry. I'm waiting for her to finish writing and the two others.
We're all right.
That's okay. Kathleen Chasey, C-H-A-S-E-Y, Redwood Coast Land Conservancy.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who want to address items right now, or perhaps our next item, which will be the discussion of the Point Arena and Walla tour? Go ahead. Well,
It's a different project? Is that fair?
sure.
Okay. So when you came back from Point Arena at about mile marker 10 is a big Caltrans turnoff, where people look out to look at the ocean. It's between Schooner's Gulch and Hearn Gulch. Are you there with me? In between Schooner's Gulch, which is state park property as I understand it, there's this huge Caltrans property which has a pullout, has no trails on it to continue the California Coastal Trail. However, just south of that is a Redwood Coast Land Conservancy pocket beach called Hearn Gulch. So a few years ago, MCOG was approached to try to get the wheels turning on that. There's an 8-acre private property between the Caltrans and the current pocket beach, which is owned by Land Conservancy. But we would like to start the ball rolling on continuing the California Coastal Trail between Schooner's Gulch and Hearn Gulch. And we're going to work on, again, trying to purchase that piece of property, which we got pretty far, and then there were some liens that couldn't be dealt with. But it's 10 years later, so we think that the economics look different. So I'd like to get that on your radar.
And I'll just also just sort of recap a little bit,
Okay.
but the funding that goes, again, is that quarter-cent sales tax. So the focus of that quarter-cent sales tax that the state has created is for transportation, and it's, although we can dip our toe into recreational trails, and we do when we can, we do, but just to be sure, clear.
And you know what, I know that. I'm sorry, the State Coastal Conservancy now has quite a bit more money with Prop 68 passing. So they were going to fund it when they had hardly any money, so we're pretty sure they would fund the purchase of the property and the expansion of Hearn Gulch. It's the Caltrans piece of property that the state already owns, that no one needs to buy. Someone just needs to say, we can put the trail on it, or give it to the state parks, or whatever that process is. I don't know what that process is, but I think it involves you guys.
Well, actually, Caltrans is here.
Yep, I know, I saw it.
Yeah, okay. And thank you. Are there any other members of the public who want to address? Go ahead.
My name is Richard Wynn, I'm a Walla resident. Just to go on with what you're saying, my biggest concern is the people who are bicycling and they're mostly going from north to south. With this project you're talking about, it seems like it's long past due time for safety reasons. And maybe safety funding would be involved, especially in congested areas like this, areas where there's development, to have an obvious bicycle lane or path. And if for funding reasons, any of these could be joined, in some places you could take the bicycles off the highway where there is the coastal trail. And combining the funds and maybe be able to get both of them completed. So it's just, there are some days it's just very dangerous. I, as a bicyclist too, won't even dare take highway one. I don't know how these other people do it, but to me it's a big safety issue. And it will be through here as the summer progresses.
Any other comments? All right, well, thank you. And so we'll go on to our regular calendar, in which is the single item of discussion of Point Arena Walla area tours, along with transportation plans and projects. So this is for both staff and board members to comment on what we saw so far, and we are yet to see the Walla downtown tour, although some of us were on the board a few years ago when we were here. And we're all probably somewhat familiar with Walla, whether we live here or not. So does staff want to kick this off?
Yeah, just briefly. So You know, one of the things that we've been trying to do over the last couple years is sort of go back to the communities where we have done these community planning efforts. So the Point Arena Community Plan, Walla Community Action Plan, it's been many years since those are completed. It's nice to go back and see some improvements that have come out of those plans. Like Dan mentioned in public expression, is often those planning documents that make a project possible. So the Safe Routes to School project, the SHOP project in Point Arena, those are all things that were informed by the planning effort there. What we'll be seeing this afternoon, the downtown streetscape project came out of the community action plan and then was further refined in the, I'm going to get the name wrong, but the downtown engineered feasibility study. So we are excited to see the features that will be included in the project this afternoon. So this is just an opportunity to talk about what we've already seen, and then project manager Frank Demling, is right behind me, and Liza Walker from Caltrans are here to be our tour guides this afternoon, but also can answer questions possibly about the state projects that we talked about in Point Arena this morning. And then I know Frank also has got a lot of information, materials to provide for the tour this afternoon. So we want to do some questions, and then we can.
Well, I'll just say that I was intrigued to see the progress that's been made over time on the the feasibility study looking at alternative routes for the
Windy or the Garcia River
over by Point Arena,
yeah.
Because that I remember was discussed maybe 8 years ago at an MCOG meeting on the South Coast about how important it was to address the increasing frequency of the flooding that takes place down there. And several years later, there's a feasibility study that's midway, I guess, still to identify the preferred route. And then, of course, funding to implement that will take many more years after that, but at least there's progress being made.
Right. Yeah, that it is exciting to see movement on that issue. And I believe there's even potentially something even sooner, right? There's an interim project proposed. Is that?
I believe in March there's going to be some funding for further studies.
Oh, for further studies, okay.
But I think they said, Caltrans said their interim project was to just simply raise the bridge on Highway 1, although that doesn't address the fact that the highway is several feet too low.
Right.
That's what they said, the access is apart.
So if board members have questions, this would be the time to ask. Otherwise, Frank can talk about what we'll be seeing this afternoon.
I'd just say that for me it was really good to see the whole Garcia River situation, because I've heard about it for years and years, and this is the first time I could really see what we're dealing with. And as far as transportation needs, you know, the need for this some kind of solution to it. So that was really beneficial to be on the ground and see it.
Want to go ahead, Frank?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Frank Dumpling. I'm a project manager for Caltrans, and I'm also assigned to the Walalla Streetscape Enhancement Project. I'll let you know that design is currently working with environmental to conduct what is known as an alternatives analysis. We've got 2 alternatives that are under study, 2 alternative alignments, 1 alignment, alternative 1. I've got some handouts here for you. It basically follows the existing center line of the highway. Alternative 2 is slightly to the east, but not much. We're looking at the differences between the 2 alignments and what the impacts to parking would be. And if there is any significant impact, from the alternative 1, and if there's any benefit to actually shifting the alignment east, alternative 2. So what we did last time we were down here with the presentation is we circulated a questionnaire to get input from local community members, businesses. And we got tremendous feedback, and that information has been tabulated. We've got a quick summary on what those questions were, what the feedback was, and then we've got a summary of those comments here, which are very interesting, which you might want to take along on the tour. Also, we've got a layout that shows alternative 1, the streetscape itself. We've got another handout here that shows the right-of-way impacts, and then another that shows what the existing location for the utilities would be. And then this handout last shows the typical section for the roadway. Also want to point out that in the alternatives analysis, what we are looking at is if there's any benefit in moving the alternative lane to the east, and would it minimize to some degree the relocation needs for any of the utilities, especially the utility vaults themselves. We understand that there are lots of concerns with parking, with closing off the on-street parking, but again, the overwhelming response from the community and the business owners is to go with alternative 1, which is basically installing the sidewalk and bike lane throughout the entire length of the community. So right now, schedule-wise, we're again conducting an alternatives analysis. Design is still providing environmental with information that they need to complete their technical studies. The soonest that we would be circulating the draft environmental document would be May 15th of this year. The latest would be June 30th. So sometime in that month and a half is when we hope to circulate the draft environmental document. There's still some work that needs to be done by design to make sure that environmental has everything they need to finalize their technical studies. But as you will see from the handouts that we have here, we're well underway. So, any questions? Okay, just in case it starts raining, which I thought it might be, but it's not yet, I've got some laminated copies here, just in case.
And you'll be open for questions during the tour.
I'll be accompanying you on the tour. Thank you.
So, are there any other questions or discussion about what we've seen? I know for the Walala projects, I anticipate that the majority of the discussion will probably take place on the tour since we haven't actually seen it yet. So, on any other issues? Any other questions or discussion?
What's happening with the Mountain View Road?
Mountain View Road we didn't talk about that on our tour today. We didn't drive it on the way over either. You did, okay. And unfortunately, we don't have a county DOT representative here to address that today. So I know that I believe they've got some storm damage sites that they're working on, but that is the extent of my knowledge, and it's not part of our.
I know as a general rule, the Department of Transportation takes maybe 2 to 3 to 4 years between a slide occurring and getting engineering and then getting approval from Caltrans, FEMA, whoever they're getting the emergency funding from, and then implementation. So there's always a lag time where roads become storm damaged and then actually repaired. So refresh my memory, when did this road drop to 1 lane?
I think it was during this winter, wasn't it, or was it last year? I haven't been over it for a couple of years.
So we're still in that 3 to 4 year time frame that's typical for replacing or repairing. Okay, all right. So then we're going to go to consent calendar. We have a few items for consent, which is approval of the March 4th, 2019 minutes, approval of February 20th, 2019 Executive Committee minutes and acceptance of the fiscal year 17-18 audit of Mendocino Transit Authority. Have a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll move to approve 7 and 9. I can't make a motion for the executive committee.
Well, do we have
I'll move for 8.
do you want to just move?
Do all three.
I'll move for all 7, or all 3 of them.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion, second. Any comments on the consent calendar? We're all present, so we can vote. Just all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Now we're going to recess this to the Policy Advisory Committee, which includes Caltrans. And we're going to reconvene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency. Do we have a motion to ratify what we are just approved, which was the consent?
I will move to ratify the last 3 items.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, all right, now we're going to go on to reports. Any particular reports from Mendocino Transit Authority? None? North Coast Rail Authority, I don't know, Loretta, were you able to attend their most recent meeting?
Loretta, do you have an NCRA report?
They canceled the March meeting, so no.
Okay. MCOG staff summary meetings, which we have. Do you want to highlight anything?
And I don't have anything to highlight, but if there are questions on anything, we can answer questions.
Planning staff?
Yes, we had expected to hear about the 2 grants that we submitted by now, but we've been told by Caltrans that we will not hear until mid-May.
Now, does that include the climate adaptation?
Yes,
Okay.
it's the adaptation grant for the fire emergency evacuation planning, and it's the planning grant for SB 743 vehicle miles traveled study, regional baseline study. So we now won't hear until mid-May, which makes it a little bit of a timing challenge with approving our work program in June. But the grants are in the work program as if we're expecting them to be approved with the required match. If they're not approved, we will need to move them. However, on a parallel note, we will be applying through a different pot of money that's become available. It's excess regional rural planning assistance, RPA money. There's about 300 and something thousand available. So we're going to also submit one of those grants for that funding part, for the SB 743 study. So both of those grants we also expect to hear about in May.
And then I don't know if this is a planning or administration staff, but I don't know if either have heard from, had any contact with the CTC and their Rural Counties Task Force. And remember when we met with the CTC executive director and we talked about the growing issue in California of communities that have one road in, road out, and sometimes the emergency access route is going to occur on a private property and traditional transportation funds can't fund those. And we were lamenting the fact that wouldn't it be great if the state could entertain some legislation that would allow for at least some funding stream to be available for private emergency access routes.
So I go to all the RCTF meetings, and there has not been any proposed legislation that would change that. I believe the legislative proposals had to be in by the end of February, and there was nothing on that came out of the current proposed legislation. So at this point, there's no change. I expect that something like that, because I think it's still an emerging issue at this point, but it'll still continue to be an issue, and we could see something about that in the future.
Yeah, so I think what we're hoping is that the Rural Counties Task Force could work with the CTC staff. I know they don't have a big staff, but to try to formulate some proposal, maybe identify some funding streams that could be proposed, and then hand off that proposal to willing rural legislators to say, hey, would one of you like to carry this?
Yeah, that is definitely something that we could address at RCTF, and if the task force as a whole is interested in pursuing something like that.
Was there anything from administrative staff?
Yeah, I have a couple legislative items that I wanted to mention. One piece of proposed legislation that we are tracking and is of concern is Senate Bill 152. This is from Senator Bell, and it proposes some pretty significant changes to the active transportation plan, or program rather. So the ATP is a program that, as a whole, our county has done pretty well in. It's provided funding for several projects around the county, the Covelo 162 Trail,
I believe the bridge in Lakeville, because they had about 5 different funding sources, I think one of them was probably an ATP grant.
Right, and then very recently, the city of Willits, in the most recent ATP funding cycle, received a $6 million grant for a rail trail. The city of Ukiah, one portion of their rail trail is ATP funded, 2 portions are ATP funded. So it's been a pretty successful program, although it is a very cumbersome application process. However, there are some pretty significant changes to it. So currently, the total pot of funding, which has been increased significantly through SB1, it is 40% of available funding goes to large urban areas, and then they have their own application cycles within their area. 50% is available through a statewide competitive program that anyone can apply to, and then 10% is set aside for a competitive program for small urban and rural areas. So the proposal would change the large urban share to 75%. It would increase the small urban and rural to 15%, but would limit the statewide pot to only 10% and would require anything awarded through the statewide competitive program to be of a transformative nature. So this is the result of a perception by Bay Area counties that they did not get their fair share of funding in the last competitive funding cycle. So they're trying to increase the amount that they would have directly to their areas. Although the proposal would increase the small urban and rural pot, the amount that it is reducing the statewide pot is of great concern. We can compete currently in both the small urban and rural pot and the statewide pot. So it would reduce the amount of funding that any area that's not part of a large urban to only 15% of the funds, or 25% of the funds, rather than the current 65% of the funds. So it's harder to compete in the statewide pot, but it would be even harder if only 10% of the funds went into that pot. So that one we are concerned about, and I want to mention that any of these could come back at a future MCOG meeting, that the MCOG board members could take a position on these pieces of legislation. Another.
Was there any discussion about this sounding like it's likely to pass? Would we be better off proposing 20% for the small, the rural, and assuming it's going to?
So there's been pushback. It's going to be discussed by the North State Super Region at our meeting next week in Chico. Rural Counties Task Force has, we haven't talked about it at a meeting yet, but I think it'll come up at the next meeting. And at the RTPA group meeting, it was talked about, and with concern expressed even by some of the representatives from urban areas due to the drastic reduction in the statewide funding pot. So I don't have a sense whether it will be successful or not because of the pushback, but it's something that could come back, and I will update you if what it's sounding like at those our CTF and our TPA meetings. So another piece of legislation is AB 1568. This is the piece of legislation that finally makes a proposal for the withholding of transportation funds in relation to housing production and making adequate progress on housing production goals identified in the housing elements. So it's been proposed. There's been a lot of pushback already, not surprisingly, pushback from local agencies, but then also a sense that the voters made this clear statement with the defeat of Prop 6, and then that this would be going against the will of the voters. We have been told by the League of California Cities that the author of the bill is receptive to changing the language, maybe to rather than targeting actual housing production, to focus rather on housing element compliance. So for agencies, so it'd be penalizing agencies that don't have compliant housing elements rather than actually focusing on production, which local agencies, even when they are making good efforts to make housing possible, can't actually build houses. So that's another piece that we expect will be changing before it's final. And then one final item that I wanted to mention is Senate Bill 127. This is a proposal that would affect the SHOP program, which is the State Highway Operation and Protection Program, or is it Preservation Program? Preservation Program. Thank you. So that's the major pot of money that the state has to do the majority of projects on state facilities. They can be, very large projects all the way down to, smaller projects like guardrail replacement, paving, things like that. So this bill would require that a certain percent of that program be used for active transportation. And although, we are supportive of active transportation and want to protect the active transportation program specifically, there are concerns about limiting this particular source of funds and targeting it for that purpose. Caltrans already has to comply with complete streets. There's a sense that this would be too limiting for these types of projects and not necessarily appropriate for this program. So are there any questions on any of those? No. All right. That's all, the only thing that I wanted to report on.
Do you have any director's reports on the California Association of Council of Governments?
Who do you want, Janet or me?
Go for it.
Okay, we attended weekend before last a conference at Yosemite, and I have to say it was well designed. It was the first time that the local government commission and CalCog met together. Apparently we have been meeting in different cities at the same time, talking about the same issues. So over a drink, somebody discovered that and said, wow, why don't we just get together and do this? And let's do it in Yosemite. So it was great. Things that I was on their board meeting, but just highlights, I'll just tell you, it was really amazing to see what some of the bigger cities are doing in terms of transportation with microtransit, some interesting ways of getting people to get on the bus, and kind of an Uber van, which gets you in the neighborhood of your area. You call them up, they come to the area on their regular route, and they pick you up and they take you near where you need to go, or maybe where it might be on the route. So that's working really well in small communities, smaller communities, but I think this one was West Sacramento, which I don't think of as a big place, but it's bigger than us. I thought that was an amazing thing, and it's, they believe they're going to make money on that, so that's something. We talked about the fire recovery efforts in Butte and Santa Rosa, and how they were able to process, by speeding up the building permits, they were able to process some phenomenal number of rebuilds and new builds in those communities, so that whole communities are back up and running. And how that was done is contact them, and they'll tell you how that was done. We learned about something called opsites.com, which is funding that comes from reinvesting money that comes from capital gains, and apparently no government control of that. You can get money to reinvest. Would be really good for a land trust, speaking of land trusts, to purchase land, and you can get this money. The idea is that it's the money is investing in something that will pay off in the future. So I think it's more designed for businesses, but it seems like it would be perfect for areas where you want to redevelop. We learned about, there was a person from UC headquarters, not just Berkeley or Davis or anything, and she's talking about their efforts at light industry and how they're partnering with colleges to create light industry jobs. And so I asked her about the local level, like Mendocino College. And she said, certainly, because the UCs and the community colleges are partners. And so there might be education available for doing something like biomass fuel plants, or the reuse of waste wood lumber, which can be turned into logs and built things like this. She showed us pictures. And this all came from waste wood that was chopped up and put back together. No plastics, no metal, just wood. So it was an exciting meeting. I just wanted one highlight of the board meeting was they supporting repealing Article 34. I think this is humorous, so I've got to bring it up. Apparently there's an old Article 34 on public housing projects, and it was designed in the 50s to keep the kind of people you don't want in your neighborhood out. So it defines affordable housing, so that it repeals the projects that require a local vote of the city before you can approve an affordable housing project. I bet you didn't know that was around, or maybe you do. So we get around that because we define affordable housing as more than 50% of the units to be affordable. So we go to 49, and that's how we get around it. So we're supporting repealing that. I voted yes on that, and that's my report. I learned a lot. How about you, Ken? Janet was there to fill me in and educate me.
Yeah, I did.
And this is the program.
Right. Yeah, I didn't bring my notes with me, but there were a variety of topics, and covering transportation, housing, the fire evacuation planning and emergency responses, and the biomass micro products, the opportunity zones, ballot measures, how to successfully pass a tax measure. It was just a whole raft of things. A great kind of intimate sized conference that people could do a lot of networking and make a lot of contacts. So I thought that was definitely worthwhile.
And at the end, they had us network, they had a lot of networking, but they had a structured network on the last day, a breakfast with the area that you're from on the table, so you sat together with people. So we were at the North Coast table.
Yeah.
And talked to Arcata and some other people that were in small cities like us. And of course, our issues are very similar. So we had exchanged cards, and we had a lot of things to talk
Call that
about.
a regional roundtable.
Regional roundtable.
So, we kind of got together with our general areas and other agencies in our area. Had some good talks. And then people crossed over and, checked out other regions as well. So it's kind of neat, there's some intermixing. But yeah, interesting sessions on economic development, I thought, and workforce development, when there are these, large companies coming in to, say, redevelop, say, an old naval site to build autonomous vehicles, something for the future. The locals were working hard to make sure that their local population had a chance to compete for jobs in those same industries right there. But they weren't well prepared. They required training, and so they've been working hard on getting training for their own local people to get some of these new jobs. I thought it was really interesting. Yeah. So.
Thanks for the report. Any other directors' reports? If not, we can go on to our part 2 of our transportation tour of Walla.
Do we report the end of the ad hoc meeting?
We should go ahead.
Well, we met as the ad hoc with the planning and the administrative side of the COG. And that was last Thursday.
Yes.
And I don't know if we do more now.
Yeah, that our recommendation will be on a future MCOG agenda, probably our next monthly meeting, to extend the contract for another year, as outlined in the existing contract.
I have a question about that. So I was asking Janet, with the current owner of the business retiring, how is that going to work? Who's in charge? Carl?
So I will be purchasing the business from Phil. So that's the plan.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go.
Could I just say a quick word?
Sure.
Robert Youngling, GMAC Chairman, just wanted to say thank you to MCOG, to Caltrans, to the ICO for being here, to all the local residents that came out to this meeting before we head out onto the streets of Walla. Okay? Thanks for having your meeting down here.
Okay, so I think we're done. Maybe just a couple minutes if people need a quick break before we start